measured by the scale.
Welcome to Breaking Lines, episode 2. My name's David Van-Cauter. I have with me Simon Cockle.
Hello.
And Jay Ward.
Hello.
If you heard our first podcast, you'll know that this is all about poetry, and we'll be continuing on that theme. Many poems, some feedback from you as well. In part 1, we'll be reading 3 of our favourite poems and having a bit of discussion about them. We'll then be setting a workshop for you to do during the musical break. In part 2, we're going to have a theme. We're going to be talking about comedy gold in poetry. Then we might do another workshop. And after that, we're going to have your feedback and some poems that you've contributed based on the last episode. So, without further diversions, I'll read my first poem. Now, this is an old favourite, and it's by Philip Larkin. I first came across this poem when it cropped up in the Whitsun Weddings, which I was studying for A-level, and it's stuck with me ever since. Just love everything about it. I'll read it to you first, and then we can talk. It's called Broadcast. Giant whispering and coughing from vast Sunday-full and organ-frowned-on spaces precede a sudden scuttle on the drum, the Queen, and huge resettling. Then begins a snivel on the violins. I think of your face among all those faces, beautiful and devout, before cascades of monumental slithering. One of your gloves unnoticed on the floor, beside those new, slightly outmoded shoes. Here it goes quickly dark. I lose all but the outline of the still and withering leaves on half-emptied trees. Behind the glowing wave bands, rabid storms of chording, by being distant, overpower my mind, all the more shamelessly. Their cut-off shout, leaving me desperate to pick out your hands, tiny in all that air, applauding. So, Philip Larkin, Broadcast, written in 1961 for his then partner, Maeve Brennan, who died, I think she died in 2003. But she did say that this was, it was a poem about her, and there's some quotes you can find about that she said. And the setting of this poem is the idea that Larkin is listening to a radio broadcast of a classical concert, and Maeve is in the audience, and he's trying to listen for her. So he's listening, and she's there. So you've got, what I like about this poem, it's a love poem, but it's got a sense of humour to it as well. Typical of Larkin when he's got a kind of a light touch. Some of his stuff can get a bit heavy, can get really into kind of death and how awful death is and this kind of thing. But here he takes a step back from that. And what the poem does is it takes this idea of distance and how a relationship is based on two people, and this broadcast is connecting the two of them. So it's full of all this kind of sound waves, this idea of the hiss and every little detail of this broadcast. But what it's really about is his relationship with her. So it takes this very kind of sort of an everyday idea and tries to make important about the sense of the individual in society, because these people at the concert represent all the other people in the world, all the people who he doesn't know. They're just a noise, they're just part of the hissing, they're just part of the background, part of the interference. But this one person who he's trying to pick out, tiny in all that air, that's what's important. And he makes all these little jokes about, all these in-jokes. The slightly outmoded shoes, Maeve wrote that was an in-joke between the two of them about her own shoes. The gloves, she was often losing her gloves. But the glove also represents this relationship between them. And it's full of these. We've got one of my favourite lines in all of Larkin in here, which is, where is it here? then begins to snivel on the violins. I love that. But this line, beautiful and devout before cascades of monumental slithering. Well, I mean, it's just... there's so much in that. It's just this idea of not knowing what's going on, but it's cascading, and it's so visual, but at the same time very audio. You can hear it.
It's like how audiences move, isn't it? In a sense, like they are. You can see them as one organism, but also as individual people.
And those radio broadcasts with the huge reverb and like everything is amplified, isn't it? You know, the whispering and the coughing and then obviously the Queen being played as well before the concert starts. But I love the way that it completely switches in the middle stanza. Here it goes quickly dark. I lose all but the outline of the still and withering leaves. So we're moved instantly from the concert hall to the outside. Which is, of course, his own sort of reality. You know, he's sitting there listening to it, and then we kind of move, don't we? But it's very, very powerful.
He's so perfect, isn't he? With economy of detail, that it's just pitched exactly right. Like the last line, your hands tiny in all that air. I think a lot of writers may have just written your hands, you know, and then. But the idea that they're made tiny, I don't know. I just love the way he doesn't waste a single word in his poems. But each line is just, you know, so packed as well. It's quite amazing the way he does that in all of his poems.
This is why I always love Lucken. It's structural. Everything is very structural. There's very strong rhymes in this. Every stanza has the same rhyming. The rhythm is exactly the same in each line. But it doesn't sound like that when you read it.
No.
It sounds like he's just sort of chatting with you.
Yeah, have you ever listened to him read his stuff?
Yes. He had a very kind of...
All of a sudden you're like... Oh, that's the rhythm. The way he'll pronounce a word that maybe rises on an inflection or whatever he does with that word, he twists it sometimes the way he's pronouncing it, and then you can feel the movement of the poem better when he reads. He's quite a little joy to discover that way. Sometimes his poems, if you hear him read, of course, some poets are dead and they were. You know, they weren't able to broadcast their stuff from way back.
Well, that's broadcast. I mean, it's called broadcast. It's about this communication that we have, and I love that. You know, I talked in the last episode about Simon Armitage and the shout, and about this idea that how you communicate with people. And I thought this followed on quite nicely in terms of what we're doing here with the podcast. Is we're trying to reach out to people who we've never met quite often.
Well, we're broadcasting, aren't we?
We are broadcasting,
but we don't have tiny hands. So
No. I just thought quite nice, an old favourite. Should we move on?
Yeah, I was going to say also his like contempt for classical music as well, because he was such a lover of jazz. So that comes across with the snivelling of the violins, doesn't it? Okay. My poem is Mango by Ellen van Nerven, which was a bit of a cause célèbre a couple of years ago. I'll read the poem first and then I'll talk about the story that it generated. So this is Mango. 8 years old, walking under the bridge, scrub, swamp, abandoned machinery, insides of tennis balls, bits of fences, meeting the boys at the dam, bikes in a pile, skater shoe soles, not cold in, never is. Boys talking about mangoes, slapping water, some have never had one. Listen to the taste, the squeeze of a cheek, dripping chins. A dog jumps in, they pull on tufts of hair, fill ears with mud, breeze full, clouds break. They remember my birthday is tomorrow. Now, you might have heard of that poem, not necessarily because you've heard of Ellen van Nerven, but you may well have heard of the poem because of the context in which it became a sort of media storm, because it was used as a poem on an exam paper in Australia. And basically, students took this exam, very important exam, couldn't make head nor tail of the poem, and then launched onto social media and basically spent the next 24, 48 hours shouting at each other about how much they hated the poem and how much it had ruined their chances, future chances. But also there was a small minority of students who found the Twitter account of Ellen Van Neerven and started to abuse her racially. She's an Aboriginal poet. So, of course, the idea is that, you know, there was this huge outpouring of emotion around the poem. And then, of course, the media storm was about the fact that she'd been racially abused. What I didn't realise, though, and that's coming back to the story again, is that there was then a fresh set of criticism to do with the poet, because the poem is called Mango, and that apparently is slang for somebody who is a virgin. And that there's a suggestion in this poem that the girl in the poem is either sexually abused by the boys or is raped. And so the idea is that, first of all, there was the storm about, you know, the poem and why it was included. Then there was the backlash of people, you know, talking about the racial abuse. Then, of course, there was the next wave, which was to do with the idea that why was this poem, which was about sexual abuse, included? And it's further muddied by the fact that the question on the exam paper was to analyse the poem and to focus on how it delights in discovery. And that suggests to me that the exam board that actually included the poem in their paper didn't necessarily realise what the poem was about. And so you've got students that are tasked with the job of going through the poem and trying to identify that sense of discovery in the poem. And then you've also got people that are well aware of the fact that the slang is a reference to somebody who is a virgin. So, of course, it's a perfect sort of media storm. And at the heart of it is, I think, a very, very wonderful poem. Very impressionistic, very powerful. And there is that wonderful ambiguity in the poem. And the idea that you don't quite know what you're reading and you don't quite know what the focus is of the poem, and that it is delightful and there is discovery, but there's a sort of dark power to it. But I mean, in terms of what students said, I mean, I'm going to read this out. This is an example of a Facebook message to Van Neerven, and this student said, "We were asked to analyse your mango fucked poem, and I'm asking, what the fuck was the point of your mango bullshit?" And that was an example of what one student wrote to Ellen Van Neerven. And it's obviously, it's appalling, and why should anyone put up with any of that? But in a way, it just shows you the power of poetry. It shows you what you can achieve with that ambiguity, what you can achieve with messing around with people's minds.
Yeah.
And I applaud her for that.
Yeah. I remember reading that poem, because you sent it to me, and I have to admit, I was looking for a way into it. You know, I viewed it almost at first as a list poem, you know, of all these different things that have been mentioned. And I found out about how, you know, all the controversy that had happened about it. And it reminded me of that kind of sort of like great debate in art of how much is, you know, owned by the artist and then how much is let go by the artist once it's released, the poem is released, and what people put onto it. And so you can read that poem in one way, in quite an innocent manner, I think. I don't think that they've been particularly stupid at all. Of course, they didn't see the consequences of this at all in there when they asked people to analyse it. But it's kind of I don't know, it's kind of really interesting is not enough of a word for this, or clever, the misinterpretation of that poem, and how the innocence, there's almost a mask upon it, on that innocence. Does that actually reflect the content of the poem as well? About something that, say, if it was a sexual predator, or, if it was children innocently discovering, has the innocence been covered up how it might be in real life? And so it gives further potency to the poem itself. Like the misinterpretation has actually helped understand the poem better.
Yeah.
Did it need this controversy in a sort of warped way? I don't know. I thought it was particularly relevant because I broke it down like man go. I thought there might be something to do with man go in it. I had to look at it somehow.
Yeah.
And then I found out about it later.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's great if it's causing that debate anyway. First.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue whether or not it was a suitable choice for the exam paper, because. But I mean, it's like we have with our unseen poetry and the AQA board, and the poems that they supply are really straightforward poems. They are poems that that no one could really misinterpret.
Yeah.
But then that's I don't see why students shouldn't be challenged. I don't see why they shouldn't be intellectually challenged in the middle of an exam. But then it's their futures, it's their GCSEs, and they have to perform. So I can understand that.
How old was for the exam for?
I don't know that. I could find out, but I imagine it's like our sort of GCSE, so like 16-year-olds.
Okay, well, I would say this was suitable for 16-year-olds, certainly. Younger, but I think the themes that it addresses are perfectly okay. And what I like about it is the dual layer. So you could read it as being just about mangoes and fruit and things. But if you see beyond that and you can see what it represents, you could write something that's much more nuanced in your response.
Well, I mean, as English teachers, we equip students with a toolkit of how to analyse a poem, and that should work for any poem.
Yeah.
You get them to look at the title, you get them to look at the beginning, the middle and the end, you get them to look at, who's saying the poem, where is it set, are there any examples of sort of what we call neon language that kind of stands out? Are there words and phrases that are ambiguous? Is there like a semantic field of language in the poem? And that's what you equip students to do. So the thing is that they should be able to read any poem, regardless of the quality of the language or the underlying sort of subtext, and they should be able to analyse it. And I guess what's happened here is you've got students that were ill-equipped to deal with a poem, and then just threw their toys out the pram and just couldn't handle it. But
because it's the simple language, perhaps I think that puts people off, because they say, well, there's nothing hard here. It's all the language is very straightforward.
Yeah.
It's about mangoes. What can I say about this?
Yeah.
I get this when I'm tutoring students, that they much prefer it if you've got complicated words, because you can get to grips with it. It's much harder to write about a simple phrase than it is to do a complicated one.
But it's also relevant that if you want to write poetry and you want to play with your poems a little bit, there shouldn't be a problem with that, because it should be fun as well, and it should be fun to close read a poem yourself and see where your imagination takes you. Don't be so, it's not a one-way thing. These things are alive in a sense. Trust your instincts, or maybe get hit hard by your instincts that when they're wrong, because it's all something to go through. It's all a mental journey that can be really interesting. So I think it's a good poem, definitely, for bringing those sorts of things up.
Great. Okay, so shall we move on? Let's have Jay's poem.
Okay, this is a poem by Thomas Tranströmer. He's a Swedish poet, and this has been translated into English. It was translated by Robin Robertson, so he's a translator for different writers. This poem is called Face to Face. In February, life stood still. The birds refused to fly, and the soul grated the landscape as a boat chafes against the jetty where it's moored. The trees were turned away, the snow's depth measured by the stubble poking through. The footprints grew old out on the ice crust. Under a tarpaulin, language was being broken down. Suddenly, something approaches the window. I stop working and look up. The colours blaze. Everything turns around. The earth and I spring at each other. So, I really like this poet. He's often described as a liminal poet, a poet that's at the borders of things and enjoys that little grey area between, say, for instance, seasons changing and landscape changing. And it's the ending that I'm in love with. It's like, for me, it reminds me of, I don't know if you've ever seen those sorts of action films that stop at the last second and the enemies just both go at each other. This idea that spring hits you so hard that you right, and you look into it and it looks into you, and there's a whole wave of new being in you or new living. I really like the way it prompts that thought in me and that emotion to find joy in seasons and things coming round fresh again, as Larkin mentioned in one of his poems. And yeah, it's just those brilliant descriptions of the nature in it. How the landscape is a boat, it chafes against the jetty where it's moored, and the soul is grating like that. I think it's just brilliant. It just describes how we feel sometimes in the gloominess of autumn or winter. And then this line, under a tarpaulin, language was being broken down, written by a poet. It's often, I don't know what he's trying to get at there all the time. I can sense what he's kind of trying to get out. The collection as a whole is from a collection called The Deleted World. So, he's saying that sometimes the atmosphere can crush us a little bit, so that we find ourselves not being able to reflect upon the world as vibrantly as we normally can? Or is he saying that he was being pushed towards a newer language, a deeper language by what he's been experiencing? And to use the word tarpaulin, I think, is quite a really nice kind of slightly industrial everyday word, but an unusual and beautiful word. And it plays those different balances out brilliantly. And it's one of those kind of almost shop talk lines, where poets talk about, what is the language doing here? And so I enjoy it for all those different reasons.
I think it must be a technical thing. You sort of put tarpaulin on the ground to suppress weeds. Yeah. But underneath it, the soil is being broken down, and or maybe it's like a compost heap or something.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of those things. Yeah. I think that all those different meanings that shoot off of it are involved in that single sentence. It's really quite pivotal in the poem.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Thought Fox, Ted Hughes.
Yeah.
That idea, you've got the blank page in front of you, and then you're waiting for the Thought Fox to arrive to give you some inspiration. And that idea that at the end of the poem, the earth and I spring together and everything turns round, and there's some sort of inspiration there.
Yeah, it takes you into his perspective, doesn't it? Straight away, that he's at home, perhaps just looking out the window, but it didn't start off on that manner in any way.
I love how we combine in this poem the idea of the landscape with language. I think that's my initial thing here. It's the poem itself is the landscape, and he's creating all this. But I think it is a real place. I think he is looking out. I don't think he's imagining these things, all of them. That's I do his favourite. I'm imagining maybe. You said he was a Scandinavian writer.
Yeah, he's Swedish.
Yeah, there you go. So it really feels like that's where we are.
Yeah.
And but no, I love how the two things come together really kind of neatly. It doesn't shout at you too much. It's just sort of it's in its own landscape, and the language is literally part of that landscape, and the words in the poem all come together in this sort of mesh. That's what I like about this.
I think the line, "the colours blaze, everything turns around," is a great line to remember to yourself, that when things are getting bad, just look out for the world, because there might be something in it that suddenly takes you and cheers you up. You know, as simplistic as that the colours blaze and everything turns around, is this trust that sometimes the world is quite a beautiful place that we forget from our own anxieties and, you know, whatever neurotic thing we're feeling. So it's kind of a positive poem like that. You know, it can cheer you up quite a lot.
It's about that epiphany moment, isn't it? When you have an idea for something, when you realise something is sort of there, and it sort of shows you don't have to. It doesn't need some big life-changing event for that to happen. You can just be sitting quietly, and suddenly, the colours blazed, and now I get. Yeah, I've worked it out, whatever it is.
And what approaches the window? Like a bear or something? Or you know,
who knows?
A velociraptor.
Yes. You never let someone, when it is a postman. I don't know. Could be anything.
It could be White Walkers.
Pizza delivery. Yeah. Yeah. So I do. He's a great writer. You should check him out.
Absolutely.
What's his name again?
Thomas Tranströmer.
Okay. Excellent. So, well, there's our 3 poems.
It's workshop time now, isn't it?
And it's time.
Watch out
for that workshop thing.
Which, I think, Jay, you're going to introduce, aren't you? It's your idea.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What have we got to do with it?
We're going to do it as well.
I think that we could write a poem that has brand names in it. Okay. I have this idea of trying to incorporate our world a bit more often. So let's use things we perhaps turn away from, like shoe companies, or, you know, soap companies, or, you know, make this the enemy to the artistic person, to talk about businesses and things like that.
So we're really trying to sell this poem.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Okay. Somebody said the other day that advertising is the poetry of capitalism. Quite an interesting point. So
I've talked to people about this. Maybe after when we talk about. I think advertising and poetry are very closely linked. I have a theory about this.
Okay, so me and David are clearly on the same page, Simon.
Absolutely. Right.
5 lines, and put a brand in there, see what you can get.
Too.
And what wonderful music do we have to inspire us?
Well, we should be listening while we're doing that to Jump Steady Blues, which was written and performed by Clarence Pinetop Smith, who was only 25 when he died, which is very sad. And there's a wonderful little introduction at the beginning of this where it's all explained what's going on. And so by the time this has finished playing, we will have written those poems, won't we?
Okay, we better not talk over it then.
Absolutely, no.
Hello, Pinetop. What are you doing sitting around here with your head hung down, looking so sad?
I just think about all these piano players going around here making big money playing on these here records.
Well, why don't you play on some of these records?
That's a good idea, boy. I believe I start rehearsing right now.
Forget it.
Welcome back to part 2 of Breaking Lines, episode 2. We've all been writing furiously here, doing the workshop that we set you just before that piece of music, and we're going to be reading out what we've done. Just to remind you who's here, I'm David Van-Cauter. We've got Simon Cockle.
Hi.
And Jay Ward.
Hello.
And it's the latter of those who is going to begin this particular section, because he is the culprit behind this particular workshop.
Latter, but not last. Okay, so it was write 5 lines and try and cram some brands in there that we recognise on the high street or in other places. So this is mine. It's called Poetry Glint. There is a ford where the water doesn't rust, Microsoft upon the land. White beaches shine hope bright. A passing car traces the quicksilver gleam of my smile.
That's very clever. I spotted Microsoft and Ford.
Yeah.
Quicksilver.
Quicksilver.
Yeah, that's 3. How many were there?
3.
Smile.
Smile. Oh, Smile, of course, yeah, the bank. Yeah. So 4.
Wow,
I don't think water beaches, white beaches. Well, I nearly put smart water in there. You know, that Glasso stuff. Smart water. Is it Glasso? Something like that.
That is really clever.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. What does it mean? How would you interpret your 5 lines?
I would say, well, I think it's about like suddenly having a smile at a beautiful sight, and thinking that when we write something, we should be thinking the same way.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, and it's nice to put Ford in there, isn't it?
It's always nice to put Ford in a poem, isn't it? It's Poetry 101, isn't it? Put Ford in there. It's always a good thing.
I know. So who's next?
Yeah, I'll go next.
Simon?
Yeah. See how many brands of phone you can spot in my poem. I, phone, wrote these lines because it's my Huawei of telling you I love you. Not a song to be Samsung, but a BlackBerry clever poem.
Oh, yeah. I'm thinking at least 5.
Yep.
iPhone.
Yep.
BlackBerry.
Mm-hmm. Huawei. Yeah.
Oh, was there a Motorola? Or have I just put that in there?
I was going to put Motorola in there, but I couldn't find a way of
It's a very poetic.
I don't even know if that exists.
It's a very poetic word, isn't it?
Yeah, isn't it?
What do you mean it doesn't exist? My phone is a Motorola.
Oh, is it?
Have you know?
I didn't know they still made phones.
Yeah,
I wasn't even sure
they made
BlackBerry
the first
still made
phone,
phones.
anyway.
Did they really?
So 5. Yeah, I
and
liked it.
Samsung.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was very sweet at the start.
It was, wasn't it? Yeah. It's kind of sweet and funny. Sweet and funny.
Did you spot any other?
I think that's a lot. I think that's
found
good.
them all, yeah.
But it's interesting. Both of you have kind of gone for the pun route, trying to how to kind of cram it in, which we will be talking about soon in the thing. But no, it's good. I like it.
Right, your turn.
I kind of failed, but also I kind of took a slightly different route, because I mentioned before that I was very interested in the concept, the idea of how advertising and poetry link, and so I was sort of trying to write about that, and I was. At the end, I must be able to get a brand name into this. I couldn't, but maybe I've accidentally put one in. But okay, so brand names hasn't got a title yet. For sale, a poem. Buy one, get one free. Look closely at the label, a branded multi-pack. So many flavours, variety. On the shelves, my logos glow, forged and welded to the black depth of your irises. Believe, buy now.
That's deep.
Those are phrases we constantly come across, aren't they, every day and interact with. We're bombarded by those.
But is poetry a commodity? That's the thing, you see. Can you buy and sell poetry? Is it a currency?
It's interesting. I think that what you do is, I think what you do when you write a poem, when you create it, you're trying to get language, get it into the best way, the most succinct way of putting across your emotion, your idea, or so you're selling that little part of you, in a way, and you're trying to communicate that. And this is why I think advertising is similar, because you're doing all that, but you're doing it for a product rather than an idea. And people who work in the advertising industry do this all the time. They're constantly trying to get a creative way of kind of selling the brand and making it commit to talk to people and to connect with people.
And sometimes they use poetry.
They do quite directly sometimes, and Nationwide have been doing that a lot, haven't they?
Do you mean directly as in badly, or directly as in directly?
I've seen bad and I've seen good attempts. I quite like the Nationwide one. I think they seem to have approached people who can write and tried to commission them to do something that fits Nationwide.
It's very much performance poetry, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or formance, as we call it.
Yeah.
That's what the kids are calling it now, formance.
But I think if I'd taken a different path in the parallel universe, I could have worked in the advertising industry and sold my soul to the devil. Yeah. And I'd probably be a lot richer than I am now. I wouldn't be as fulfilled.
What's interesting about poetry is, advertising is, it tries to be quite curt, doesn't it? It tries to hit you straight away. No messing around, no waffle, unless you're advertising waffles. And then and so poetry tries to do the same, really. And there's a link there, isn't
Concentrated language, isn't it? Yeah. Like that tomato puree out of that you squeeze out of the tube.
Yeah, on waffles.
Yeah.
Is that what do you eat already?
That's what I use it for.
What, on top of waffles? Because they're waffly versatile.
Yeah. They'd have to be potato waffles.
Beautiful. That's a certain generation talking right there, isn't it?
Well, that's a good example. That it's immediate. You think of potato waffles, that's what you think of. It's so
waffly versatile.
Absolutely,
it's just so and then you think of many other, and that is an example of advertising working really well. You get a little phrase, and it's like, I know what you mean.
Yeah,
and it's all encapsulated in those just 3 or 4 words.
That's right.
And poetry is trying to do that all the time, trying to get that whole message of what you're trying to say into a few lines.
So do you think there's some frustrated poets out there that are working in the ad industry?
Absolutely. And making, as I say, far more money than me.
Give us your money. If you can.
Who was it that did Go to Work on an Egg? Was it Margaret Drabble, or it was a female writer? And she wrote the phrase. She worked in an ad agency, and she came up with the phrase "go to work on an egg," and then she became a well-known writer. So well known, I can't remember what her name is. But
it doesn't seem to be prominent, does it? Because Andy Warhol is the first person you kind of think of with how he linked art and advertising. Yeah, definitely. But I'm sure there are poets that have come from that world.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And vice versa. I'm sure there's poets that have gone into advertising.
And artists as well. I mean, it's, if you're a visual artist, it works the same way, because you're trying to sell an idea with a painting and just to sort of sell a product. And that's exactly what Warhol was talking about with his stuff.
Yeah, and what's wrong? I mean, your views on money and all of that aside, what's wrong with using that as a stimulation to perhaps improve your writing? It's a workshop worth pursuing.
Isn't it? Yeah, it is, definitely.
Exploring that world a little bit. Okay.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, so send us your advertising poems.
Absolutely. And, we want more. Them. Yeah.
We will be reading in part 3. We'll be reading some contributions from the previous podcast.
To be alive.
And so let's move on to our theme for today, which is comedy gold. Sorry, I should have done that.
Yeah, we need
the theme today, which is comedy gold. We talked about this last time, and I thought, let's do this, because poetry. This is my sort of thing. I think about poetry is. Some poetry can be anything. It's just writing, basically. It's different types of writing, but you can have really deep, kind of emotional, moving poetry, and you can have funny poetry, and you can have somewhere in between. And I've always liked to include elements of humour in what I'm writing, and I've always been interested in this idea that you can marry these two things together, and you can have a really kind of witty, lightweight poem on the surface, which is actually about really serious things going on, and so that lightness is a way in for people, because they listen and they go, I get it. If you've got someone laughing, they're kind of on your side.
Yeah.
You've got that connection. And then why not then, hit them with the message, the meaning behind it. It doesn't have to be a dramatic shift, although some poems do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can, and a lightness of touch is often a great way to communicate, I think. So what we're going to do, we're going to try and read. We've each got a poem that either we think is funny or is supposed to be funny,
supposed to be
serious, but is actually funny.
Well, all of that might come into it. And the idea is, do we find it funny? Is the humour working? Is the humour adding to it, or is it kind of detracting from what's going on? That's sort of what I thought we'd talk about. Yes. So I went with one of my favourite performance poets, certainly, is John Higley. Yeah. You'll see him around. He's always on tour, always doing things. He's done many books and lives nearby. We're recording this in Hitchin, and he lives in Luton, just down the road. And this is one of his poems from the recent collection called Uncut Confetti. I say recent, probably a few years ago. The poem is called Messiah. This Messiah walks into a bar and asks for a drink of tap water. Why don't you buy a drink for a change instead of changing water into one, says the barman. Buy one? With what? Asks the Messiah. How come you never have any money? Because I don't believe in it. What do you believe in? I believe in you. I love you. Don't give me that. You buy a drink or you get out. Oh, come on. What does a drink of water cost? It costs me labour to pour it, you take up space to drink it, and I have to wash the cup up after you. And what if you break it? Who pays then? I could mend it. Perform a miracle, you mean? And have everyone crowding around in amazement and not buying drinks? No thanks. Ow.
Yeah. Quite like the ending. Like I suppose you're going to perform your miracles in here, are you?
I do like that one, yeah. Does it start, this Messiah walks into a bar?
Yeah.
That's funny.
I thought it had to, anything that starts with a classic joke trope, that would fit. So that's partly why I chose this one. But I mean, he's written a lot of funny stuff, which is actually quite serious. Yeah. And some of it is just nonsense. Yeah. But there's a kind of a beauty to the nonsense sometimes, which is sort of catches you off guard, and you kind of, was I meant to laugh at that? That kind of thing. And this one is actually quite a serious thing about religion. If you look into it, I mean, he's set it up in the kind of here's this joke about someone walking into a bar. And so this is sort of an example of what I was saying. How you can put the two things together and try and it helps make. What do you think?
That's very clever. There's an anti-capitalism sort of message there as well, isn't there? And but it's said in a funny way.
Well, there's a humanity issue there, isn't there? That the social interaction here is you buy a drink, but I just want a glass of water. Yeah, and the kind of problems that can bring up. Because I tell you, there's a village not far away from here, and I won't say where it is, because it will identify the pub. Yeah, where the guy wouldn't let me use the toilet.
Really?
Yeah, just to go in there.
Were you a customer?
Unless I bought a drink.
Oh, I know which village that is.
That sounds reasonable.
Do you think so?
It's his
sounds insane.
It's private.
Wasn't Preston, was it?
No.
Simon,
yes.
What have you got?
Well, I was looking on Twitter yesterday, and I came across a poet, and he's written a poem, and he's including it on his Twitter account, and I read it, and I didn't know whether to laugh or not to laugh, because, well, I'll read it to you. The poet's name is Ethan J. Precombe, and that's Precombe spelt Precombe. So if you wanted to actually look up this poet. And this is a poem that he's written, and I kid you not, the title is Balls Deep in the Rockies.
Wow.
Okay? So here we go. Night falls, and my tent flaps flap in an ancient breeze that wells from nowhere, but somewhere a raccoon wails like Hendrix tuning his guitar. Far on the horizon, jagged peaks of mountain rock punch the sky repeatedly, until it bleeds a sunset into the sweater of trees that hug the chest of the foothills. I am the earth, I become the sky, and now and then the river sings through my lungs and gushes from my mouth like a wet song of the summer. The universe explodes in my right hand, and love pools at my feet.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's powerful stuff. But I mean, I can't get with it at all. It's just so overblown and just so completely, every metaphor and simile is stretched until it falls apart, and I just
It's
can't.
quite violent in the middle, doesn't it?
It is quite violent in the middle. That's right. Yeah, that the punching the sky repeatedly until it bleeds the sunset into the sweater of trees.
Yeah.
And then we get the sweater, and then the chest, and then the foothills. So it's that kind of a metaphor.
Yeah.
I mean, my night falls and my tent flaps flap.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lovely bit of assonance there. But I find it funny, but other people might find it deadly serious. I think Ethan finds it very serious, otherwise he wouldn't have written it, but
Yeah.
there you go.
One to watch.
Come on then, Jay. What have you got
Okay,
for
I
us?
picked one at random
Okay.
from an old Ogden Nash book I was given to once by somebody,
Yeah.
by someone who nearly broke my foot in a football game.
How rude.
And they came round and said, here's this Ogden Nash book. I hope you feel better. By the way, you subbed.
Well, the healing power of poetry is well known.
Yeah. So, thanks for that. Person, I can't remember who it was. I'm so sorry. I do remember. It was somebody called Russell. Thanks, Russell. Okay, this is a poem called Old Men.
Mm-hmm.
People expect old men to die. They do not really mourn old men. Old men are different. People look at them with eyes that wonder when. People watch with unshocked eyes. But the old men know when the old man dies. There you go. That's Ogden
clever.
Nash with his witty little insights into old people.
What do we know about Ogden Nash? I feel I should know more about Ogden Nash than I do.
Frederick Ogden Nash was an American poet well known for his light verse, of which he wrote over 500 pieces. With his unconventional rhyming schemes, he was declared the country's best-known producer of humorous poetry.
Thanks, Siri, for that information. So, do you find that poem funny?
I find it... No, I don't. I'll be honest, I found that at random. I think that bit of the episode today has failed.
But it hasn't, because the discussion's been about can poetry be funny, and
Yeah.
Ogden Nash is, as we've just discovered, part of the pantheon of comic, light comic poet writers.
Yeah.
And we've just proved there that his comedy doesn't necessarily travel into the 21st century. So.
I think he's written some other ones that are funnier.
Yeah.
This is from... his famous phrase is liquor is quicker, candy is dandy.
Oh yeah, that's right.
It's quite a witty phrase, isn't it? It's quite funny.
Yeah, like Dorothy Parker, isn't it?
It's very hard to write comedy.
Yeah,
It's it's as simple as that.
Comedy writers tend to be the go-to people, don't they, for written comedy?
There's not you don't watch an episode of The Office and it's written in a certain poetic it's not written in a poetic form.
Inside Number 9 had a whole episode that was written.
They're geniuses, aren't they?
But they embraced it. They went, right, we're going to do a Shakespearean episode. It's all going to be rhyming.
Oh, Shakespeare is the standard, isn't he?
Yeah.
Really, for those sorts of things.
Maybe not for comedy gold, but
No.
Trying to explain all the jokes in Twelfth Night in Act 2, Scene 5
Yeah.
to a group of Year 8s is really hard.
What was the Real Tennis?
Real Tennis in Henry V,
Yeah.
Because he does loads of puns, and he does loads of dad puns, and then he says, I'm going to kill every single French person when I come over. So it's kind of dad puns, and then it's like deadly serious, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, puns are a whole thing, aren't they? It's like, are they funny? A lot of people don't find them funny at all.
No.
In a poem, when you use a lot of puns, you're kind of doing it on purpose to try and bring out the show off your language.
Yes.
In a way.
Yeah,
That's
shows your skills. Skills to pay the bills.
Yeah, and we had it a bit with the logos. You know, you're trying to cram it into a line, and is this sort of funny? Is it working?
Yeah.
And I think there's a place for that. But is that kind of a better, not better, but does that have value? Do you think trying to just be funny in a poem, does that have value, or is it kind of wasting the opportunity of what a poem can be?
Isn't it a desperation thing? It's you know, you have to be so subtle with your writing skills to make something funny, I think.
One person's funny poem is another person's deeply, religious experience, isn't it? as we will and have discovered.
There's funniness and lightness, isn't there?
Yeah, you can have a light touch.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of poets that do that. Wendy Cope's a good sort of popular example. She can have a lightness touch, which is still sort of serious, but kind of makes you go, oh, that's clever. You know, she's done there with the scheme and that sort of. I think there is a place for light verse, but also you've got 90% of poetry, which is light verse, which is doggerel and terrible, that you might kind of randomly find online or something, and you read a load of that and you think, oh, this person is just rhyming for the sake of it, and thinks he's the most hilarious person in the world, but or she, you know, and that is not good for poetry.
No.
I don't think it's not a positive voice in the world of poetry, but
it is not. No,
as I say, it's at least 90% of what's out there is that kind of stuff.
Poetry.
Yeah,
that's clever.
Well, it's a thing, isn't it? There's a sting of poetry.
Yeah,
you know.
But I think there's a backlash against that inside a lot of magazines that won't take humorous poetry because they just, as soon as they see something funny in it, they kind of push it away because it's part of that 90% that they don't bother with. They don't publish that sort of thing, you know.
And
there's certain snobbery. You know.
I quite like dark humour, but if you write a dark humoured poem, there's a good chance that someone's just going to look at you like, well, you're a maniac. What was that? You know, what you've just said. And they won't see the funniness in it. But in a conversation with you, they might have laughed if you said it.
I wonder whether or not the default mode of poetry is strokey chin, serious, nodding at the end. Yeah, and so therefore, if you do anything funny, people will think, oh well, obviously it was very ironic. It wasn't meant to be funny. It was like it's like kind of ironically funny, but of course it's deeply serious.
Ironic. So anyway, that was the end of part 2. Almost, we're going to set one more workshop.
Yes, I'm all ready to go.
Well, I think. People send in your thoughts on that topic.
No, do,
because
we want to hear.
It is a really interesting topic.
And
you know, if you have any funny poems and you want to send them to us and perhaps maybe say why you like them or why you find them funny for whatever reason,
or send us a serious poem
and we'll start laughing at it. But this is the point, you know. It would be nice to hear.
Yeah, we could take your serious poem and rip it to shreds in a internationally listened to podcast.
Yeah, if Pre-Cum's listening.
If Ethan wants to send in any more poems,
the more the merrier.
I'll gladly take any of Pre-Cum.
Yeah. A lot of that stuff.
I've written on my notes here, what makes a funny poem, ? The answer might just be, if it's terrible.
If it's terrible,
Yeah, it could be a lot of the time.
Shall I give all the folks a workshop?
Okay. Yes, right. That's a terrible poem in this workshop.
No, this is it. So what I want everyone to write a tanka, which is like a haiku, 575, but there's 2 extra lines which are 7 and 7 syllables. So it's basically 57577. So what do we know about Japanese poetry? It's always very tranquil and it's calm and it's all about noticing sort of beauty in flowers and petals and things like that. So what I want you to do is I want you to write a tanka about something which is quite clearly wildly inappropriate as the subject matter that you would choose a tanka to write about. So obviously we know that, it's contemplative, tranquil poetry, but I want you to choose a subject which is the complete opposite.
He wants to subvert it a little.
So basically think of something that you want to write about that's completely inappropriate to make a tanker out of, and that's the workshop.
Okay, this is April Kisses by Ed Lang.
Welcome back to part 3 of Breaking Lines. And we're all still here. I'm David Van-Cauter, and I have Simon Cockle with me.
Hello.
And Jay Ward.
Hey, hello.
So, in this final part, well, in the previous part, we asked you to write a tanker.
Yes.
This was Simon's thing.
Okay, so obviously I was thinking, tanker, sort of quiet, tranquil, focus on nature and beauty and so on. So I've written a tanker about D-Day. Bullets strafe the beach as all around heads explode, sending bone shards flying, as a Spitfire crashes down, destroying a German tank.
Wow.
Okay, so completely
Nice.
Inappropriate choice of poetic form there.
Excellent. Okay,
yep.
I will follow that because I've taken up the same idea. I think it's because it's called a tanker.
Very clever.
Yeah.
So I've got a tank battle tanker. The wheels of the tanker go rumble and crunch, death spewing from its mouth. It's harsh. My lead soldier words will need some glue all day long.
That was very good. Yes, I like that. That was very clever. That's a success.
And
Tank in the tanker.
Tanker, yes. The A is on the next line. That's why the wheels of the tank. It's hard. I didn't know how to read that, but
Yeah. Very impressive.
Well, I'm just I thought is it inappropriate? But it's sort of I thought let's make it a small version of tanks, because then it's not so I don't know, taking away from the seriousness of war.
Well, precisely. You don't want to do that.
I don't want to do that.
Not this close to Armistice Day.
So it was that balance of I want to get the tone right. So I don't know if it's there, but that's
You're not even wearing a poppy, are you?
No, I'm not.
I don't know.
So, Jay, did you manage to do anything?
Yeah. I called mine Lost Dream. Thunder, blood, iris. Loud waterfall of glasses. Bin people are here. Bin people are here again. The nightmare of recycling.
That was good.
Nice.
Is my tanker.
That's a poem for my next door neighbour, that one.
You know when you just get that sound of...
Yes.
It's like, time to get up, because I'll never be able to concentrate again.
We missed ours last on Saturday.
Shocking.
I know, it was the actual rubbish bin, not the recycling, so let's hope we don't get any hot weather over the next couple of weeks.
Nice. I like that. That's good.
Thanks.
Well, 3 great poems there, and I think now we're going to kind of get interactive now, aren't we?
Yes, we've got some feedback from people. We've got some questions.
Yes.
We've got some contributions, and what have you got over there, Simon?
We had an email from a Mr. Uncracker of Dulwich, who says, I always find it hard to write poems that rhyme. Do you have any advice? For Mr. Uncracker. So what do we think then? Rhyme or not rhyme? How do we do it? What do we do as poets?
Get by a rhyming dictionary.
Very good, yeah.
Or look up
or an app, a rhyming app. You can find those, yeah. I use one of those.
A rhyming app, they're kind of okay.
Okay. I use one called Rhyme Zone, which is really good, yeah. So, and you can type in a word and it'll give you like...
No, they are good, aren't they?
Yeah, they give you like 50 words with 1 syllable that rhyme, and then 50 words with 2 syllables, and then 3 and 4. And it also does half rhymes as well.
Oh, so they get all like crochet and I am, about and all
yeah,
that kind
I
of
mean,
stuff.
it is really useful. But I mean, I've come to like rhyme more as I've written poetry, because I always try to avoid doing it at all costs, and now I'm far more inclined to do it, but not end rhyme. I quite like rhyme in the middle of
internal
lines.
rhymes.
Yeah, little rhyme bombs that you're reading a line and all of a sudden a word rhymes with the previous line and you didn't expect it to. So I quite like that.
I think on the last podcast I talked about, or the last episode I talked about being into hip hop. Listen to loads of hip hop.
Yeah.
Just listen to all the rhymes. There's constant rhyming in there. It's rhyme overload.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
This
is too much.
It's just too much rhyme, you know.
Well, so what are we saying to Mr. Uncracker? We're saying get hold of an app or a rhyming dictionary, and or maybe don't use it. Don't use it if you don't want to.
I'm a little reticent of this advice, because it's like saying, okay, I'm going to write a line, and now I need to think of another line which rhymes with that line. Yeah. And if you do that, you're a slave to your poem.
Yeah.
I say go with your gut. If it feels like it wants to rhyme, keep it rhyming.
Yeah.
If it's just not doing that, make it free verse. I think that's either is fine. I'm not I'm not one of these people who just, like a lot of editors, they say, oh, we don't want rhyming, we don't none of that nonsense, because that's not modern. I don't agree with that. I think there's a great tradition of rhyming poetry, and you shouldn't shy away from that.
No,
as you
precisely.
Say. It happens in rap all the time. A lot of spoken words stuff is a lot full of rhymes. So don't shy away from it, but just don't be a slave to it. Don't be oh, it's not a proper poem if it doesn't rhyme every line.
Don't be a rhyme whore.
Yeah.
That's that, you just rhymed then. If it doesn't rhyme every line.
That's very clever. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Uncracker, for writing in for that one. And another a letter this time from Fenula Pelt of Thetford, who asks, what is a sestina and is it worth writing one?
Very much. Very much so.
Do we all know what a sestina is?
I do. But I'll let you answer the question.
Okay, for Nuala, it's a 39-line poem, of which the first 36 lines are divided up into 6 verses, and at the end of every line in the verse, you get 6 words. So there are only 6 words. So it might be cat, dog, mouse, rat, beaver, giraffe. And then in the next verse, you have the same end words, but this time in a slightly different order, until eventually, after the 6th verse, you've gone through all the different combinations of those 6 words. And then the final 3 lines contain... Is it the 6 words again? Sort of the first line has the 2 of the words, the second line 2 of the words, and then the final line.
Yeah.
So in total it's 39 lines.
And so the final 3 are sort of a compact version of what you've just done.
And I've only ever written one, and it took me forever. And so my advice to Miss Pelt of Thetford is probably write one and get it out your system, and then never write another one. But there's the Tristina, isn't there, where you just do it with 3 lines
on it.
Yeah.
Go for it. I mean, it's you can, look, I always think that you should challenge yourself to try and fulfill a form of poetry. Yeah, a poetic form,
a sonnet, or
if you can. Because it's a great way of shaping words and rhythms outside of your normal kind of pace of thought.
It's a discipline, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a beautiful thing to do. Yeah. You might come across a way of... You might come across a talent that you didn't realise that you had. Some people can just bash out a sonnet. They're very good at it. And, they would have had to have challenged themselves in the very first place to do it.
Precisely.
I would say do as many forms as you can.
Yeah.
And they will, at first, they will be very clunky. They will just not be good poems. But if you can do it, if you can force it into a sonnet form or whatever you're trying to do, sonnet isn't too bad. You can sort of get away because you can mess around a bit with sonnet. Something like a sestina is harder work because you've got to use the same word. So that there's levels. It's like level 1, level 2, level 3, and you can just sort of keep challenging yourself to write a more complicated form. But don't expect the poem to be brilliant, and don't send it into the National Poetry Competition because it won't win. No. But it's good practice.
Yeah, and also you might, if you're not very comfortable with what you've written, you might have written 2 lines though within it that are great, and that you can use somewhere else. You might have discovered something else. Yeah. In it, and just you had to write that form to find those lines.
Yes.
Just go for it, and do it.
Okay, well,
play around with it, and then you can say to somebody, "I wrote a sestina today. What did you do?"
Absolutely. Yeah. What have you achieved? What have you done with your life?
And they will say, "What's a sestina?"
Yeah, and then you say, refer them to this podcast. Well, there you go, Miss Pelt. I hope you enjoyed our response there, and.
I think we have one more question. Was that from Jay? You had?
Yeah, I got something from a fellow called Dan, and he's interested in poetry, but he wasn't sure. He wanted to get into poetry more, and he was interested in why we might write it, and he was trying to find an avenue into poetry, basically, because he feels there's something there that he likes, but he can't quite...
I went on a creative writing course at the University of Hertfordshire, and I remember that the guy that taught it said, with any kind of writing, not just poetry, it's a bit like a bucket of sand. If you want to make a sandcastle, you need a bucket of sand. You can't just do it with an empty bucket. And it's the same with poetry. If you don't write words down on the page, you're never going to get any poetry. So my advice would be, get a notebook or a laptop or something and just write from left to right and just keep going. Just get your ideas and your thoughts down, because that's the raw material for poetry, and then you can look at it and you can start to shape it into what you want it to be. You can start to break it into lines or into verses. You can edit it. You can you can, on a computer, you can do whatever you want with it. But I think the key thing is to get the words down on the page, rather than sitting there with a blank page and thinking, right, I'm going to write a sonnet, so I need the first 2 lines to rhyme, and then you spend all morning trying to find 2 lines that rhyme.
Why do we write? What is it that we like about poetry?
I mean, from my own personal point of view, I love language, and I love doing stuff with language and making it kind of perform, and I like creating images, and I like telling a story, but using the medium of poetry.
So you like to experiment a lot, kind of play with things. You like?
Yeah, I do, but I don't. I have to say, a lot of my experiments don't necessarily end up printed out. I mean, they kind of stay as experiments. But like I say, it's about getting words down on the page, and if you don't do that, you've got no raw material to work from.
And my advice is to have something to say. Don't just say I want to be a poet, and this is where
don't pose.
Yeah, this is where the bad poets come from, because they think and they come down and it's sort of doggerel because they haven't got anything to say. Have a reason to do it. Say, right, well, I'm really annoyed about something. Write about it. And with that comes out, and there's the power and the emotion comes out in that. It doesn't. The poetry will follow. You can then look at it and go, right, well, I've got the emotion out, but I haven't written it very well. The words are a bit cliched or whatever, and that's the editing process. That's when you go back and go, right, now I'm going to make it into something that is a poem and not just this is how I feel about something. So that's the initial impetus. But in practical terms, I would suggest doing that for a bit. If you think you've got something good, join a poetry group and get some feedback from other people, because sitting there by yourself writing your masterpiece, it's not a masterpiece. It really isn't. You need people to kind of listen to it and suggest how you improve. So I suggest that, and also read poetry.
Read, and you'll have a phase where you sound like one of your favourite writers. That's fine. I think everyone has that phase. It's a rite of passage, isn't it?
I wrote every poem that was trying to pretend to be Larkin for most of my teenage years.
Yeah, well, I don't even know if you even are aware of it, and so what, if you've got to do that, you've got to do that.
Gradually you find your voice. Gradually.
Yeah, this thing about the voice. Yeah.
And this is why reading more helps, because you'll read one and you go, oh, this is better. And then you'll read someone else. Eliot was my next sort of thing. And then suddenly it was somewhere between Larkin and Eliot while I was writing. Yeah. Obviously nowhere near as good, but it was in that sort of voice. And then gradually you kind of pick your way through by reading more.
There's an interesting interplay here, isn't there, between fear. So fear and action. This thing of like, don't be worried if you're being egotistical. Don't worry about I in a poem. Now, a lot of people would disagree with that, but I think it's important to get your emotion out, and then you can change the tense or things later if you want to. Yeah, but get it out, and be true to you. And then also, as much as your ego is out there, don't be scared to show somebody as well. Yeah, it's that interplay of like being brave, being yourself, but also being brave and showing somebody. I think is really important.
You need to learn to accept criticism. Is very important. If you think everything you've written is precious and can't be changed, then you're never going to improve. No. So I think that's important.
Well, you're never going to discover things. You're never going to discover things, and it should be about that at some level, about discovering things.
One other thing I'd add is that if you want feedback on your poems, a really great place to put them is the internet. So, for example, there's a site called, I think it's Hello Poetry, and basically what you can do is you can upload your poems, you get an account, upload your poems, and then people read them and comment on them. But I would say one issue there is that if you then take those poems and you think, oh yeah, I'd love them to be in a magazine, or I'd really like to try to get them published on on a poetry blog or poetry site, they will if your poems have been on Hello Poetry or any one of those free sites, they will say that it's already been published and they won't accept it, because poetry magazines and sites very rarely will ever take a poem if it's previously been published elsewhere, and they consider those types of sites as having been published. In fact, if you put a poem on Facebook, if it's not a closed group, technically that counts as publishing.
If it's globally read, yeah.
That's right. So you have to be really careful. I mean, I wrote 6 poems and put them on Hello Poetry, and then realised that those 6 poems I would never be able to do anything with because they'd been published already. So, no magazine would take them, no other poetry website would take them. So it's a good job I didn't put like 60 poems on there, because they'd all be, useless now.
Be careful.
Yeah, you've got to be careful. I mean, it depends on how serious you want to be about poetry. But if you just want to write because you like writing and you want to get that poem out there for people to read, then by all means use those sites. But you just have to realise that you've kind of, you've done that poem in, as it were.
So you had some further feedback, Dave?
Well, yes, I had some contributions. So I've got...
Please contribute.
Yes.
Love it. We love it.
Should we remind everybody of our email address?
Yes. If you want to get in touch, we do have an email address. It's breakinglines575. So that's all one word. breakinglines575 @gmail.com. And so any feedback at all is good. Particularly if you have something poetic to add that some of any of the workshops we've done. So in the last episode, we were writing haikus about the Beatles, and we were also writing 25-word poems that were about something amazing and big. We also talked quite a lot about music and lyrics. And one of our listeners, John Callahan, has sent in something that combines 2 of those together. So he's written a 25-word poem called Music and Lyrics. This is by John Callahan. Music, the interference of even 2 tones interacting, produces instinctive emotional resonance. Lyrics, assembling a pile of recyclables, hoping that their silhouette is meaningful.
Oh, very good, John.
Yeah, I like that.
I like that one. Yeah,
I like the lyrics.
I think that's great. I know, John. He's a musician. So,
right.
And he's so he knows about how these things
familiar tools
work together.
Yes.
So I was interested to get his feedback about how those 2 things work together. I think we touched on it a bit.
Yeah.
Last time, but I don't think we quite got into the depth of what makes a poem and a lyric a lyric. I know it's a kind of an ongoing conversation.
That's an entire podcast, really, isn't
it? We tried to.
Yeah.
So listen, if you haven't heard it,
you say lyrics are slightly limited by saying that they're recyclables. But I like that because it's about trying to find an extra sort of chink of light of meaning in something that's been done many times before.
I like the phrase hoping that their silhouette is meaningful.
Yeah.
It's nice. The idea of lyrics having a silhouette is it's just really good.
it? Yes, it is.
So it's a sort of visual idea bringing together all the
it's like shadows on a wall or something, and
And about how it reflects. I mean, so it's corrected by the light that reflects. So it's not just a one-way thing. It's about how the listener responds to them. Yeah.
One for the liner notes.
And the other one we've received. This is from Rachel Haynes, who has sent us a Beatles haiku.
Right.
Our household spring clean. Tape recorder blares. Beatles. We harmonise. Dust.
Ooh, I really like that.
Yeah, I like that. The final word, dust.
Yeah.
Dust as a noun or dust as a verb.
Harmonise dust. That's really good.
Well, that's clever too, isn't it? Yeah.
I like that.
There's a lot of things going on in that, in such a small...
Because dust is small and scattered.
Space. Yeah.
But it's various and many. It's beautiful.
Well, there you go. It shows what you can do in a haiku.
Very talented person, Rachel is.
Yeah, well, very nice. So there we go. So if you've got any, I mean...
Tape recorder.
Yeah.
Remember
Very
tape recorders?
exactly. It's
Do you remember
very
those?
It suits the dust as in
Yeah.
something kind of ancient or older.
Do you remember cassettes? Do you remember them?
Of course. Yeah,
What was all that about, eh?
they were amazing.
But this is so obviously set. So it even gets a set of the. There's a timing going on here. We know that it's of a certain era because of the tape recorder.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's a childhood memory. And it's just that detail of the tape recorder gives it. Suddenly we know where we are, what era we're in.
Yeah.
So you've got this idea of the whole childhood and how it's associated with the Beatles, and that's really nice.
Blare. I love that word. Blare, when something blares.
All right, Tony.
Onomatopoeia, isn't it?
Yeah, it's blaring.
Yeah.
It's like, it's quite visual as well, though. Like it takes over, it paints the room.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It does, doesn't it?
Good haiku.
Excellent. Well, thanks for that, Rachel. And yes, as I say, if you've got any more from those kind of things or anything we've done today, please send them to the email address.
Yeah, we'd love
And
it.
the email address will be included in the description of this podcast on both iTunes, Podbean, Acast, and quite possibly Soundcloud, but mainly the first three that I mentioned.
And any other links we remember to do within the episode itself.
We'll put
we
links
mentioned.
into the poems that we've read today.
Yeah, links into the poems.
Yeah.
All of that. Yeah, no, that's great. And we're almost at the end now.
Yeah,
so thanks very much for listening. We were just going to, on the subject of plugs, we were just going to plug one other thing that's happening.
Plug satchel.
Plug satchel, yeah.
Yeah, you can't use the plug satchel. That's already been done. Not rip off of
It'll be the first
podcast.
email. It'll be a complaint email.
From Scott Aukerman.
We mentioned in the last podcast that both myself and Simon have got books that have just been published.
We have.
On Aranig Press. I think
I say Arenig.
Aranig.
You say Aranig.
Maybe we'll sort that out by the time
By
we.
the 29th of May.
29th of
When
May.
we go and stand in front of people.
No, I hope not. I hope you're arguing. And the owner's looking at you.
It costs £3 to get in, doesn't it, to our badge?
It does, yes.
Yeah.
So the Poetry Cafe in Betterton Street in London is the place to be on Wednesday the 29th of May.
At 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. We're going to be launching both our books and also
Gareth Ryder-Davis.
Gareth Ryder-Davis, also with a recent book.
Yeah.
So come along. Please bring 20 friends and you will be entertained. So we're both going to be reading, and all three of us, and then we might have a bit of Q&A at the end.
Yes.
Which will probably sound a lot similar to what you've just been listening to.
We could record a podcast there, couldn't we?
After stage.
Yeah.
Why not?
I'll be there as well,
Live.
so you can ask me questions like, why haven't you got anything published? What's going on?
Oh, you have.
And we can sit there in uncomfortable silence with each other.
No, you're in anthologies. Lots of anthologies, aren't you?
Yeah.
That's a book, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just
Well, you're saying I'm lazy, it's true.
No, I'm not saying lazy.
time and persistence. That's the answer.
So I'll be going, so it'll be good, and it'll be a busy night.
So you can come and talk to us
see
and
Gareth.
and meet us in the flesh, as it were.
Well, I can. Thanks.
I was talking to the iPhone. I wasn't talking to you. I was just looking in that direction. I didn't mean you.
Thanks very much,
That's
Simon.
all right. That's okay.
But we'll try to include a link to the site for the event as well under the podcast, so you don't have to remember all this stuff.
It will be good. I will be trying to get one of you to heckle the other one with Aranig as soon as they say the wrong pronunciation.
Thetford.
I think
Shout Thetford.
And that's enough of the plugs, and that's enough of the podcast. So thank you very much for listening to Breaking Lines, episode 2. Don't forget there is also an episode 1 if you haven't seen it, and listen to it, rather. And you could have seen it.
it's a big window behind us. There could be someone looking in.
There could be, yeah. And there will be a third one, hopefully. We'll see how many.
At least a third one.
Well,
if
yes.
not a fourth one.
Well, we're gonna have 6 seasons? I think I said at the beginning.
6 seasons, yeah.
Plus Christmas special.
Christmas special.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
And there's going to be...
Summer special. You remember summer specials? Remember in the 70s, summer specials? They had them on BBC in summer. They were special programmes. They were like variety shows. They were called summer specials, yeah. You remember them?
No.
No. But,
That's the end. Goodbye.